It was supposed to be a quiet funeral. The kind where everyone wore dark clothes, spoke in whispers, and kept their phones off out of respect. The wooden church on the edge of Jefferson County had seen its share of loss, but today it felt heavier. I stood near the polished mahogany casket, surrounded by floral arrangements and the hum of a sorrowful hymn from a single violin. My name is Valerie Hightower. I'm 58. Widow. No children. Former legal consultant for the Department of Justice. But that morning, I was just a grieving cousin saying goodbye to my Uncle Walter. The moment shifted when the front doors creaked open. Heavy boots echoed against the wooden floor as a uniformed sheriff stormed in, hand on his holster, jaw clenched like he was ready for war. His badge said, D. McAllister. His eyes scanned the room like he expected trouble to leap from behind the pews. I didn't move. I stayed by the casket, fingers loosely clasped in front of me, heart steady despite the unease crawling across the room. He zeroed in on me. You, he barked, raising his voice in a way that made the violinist freeze mid-note. Step away from the casket. Murmurs rippled through the mourners, but no one moved. I tilted my head slightly. This is a funeral, deputy. You're disturbing a private service. He didn't flinch. You fit the description of a person of interest we're looking for. Hands where I can see them. I did not raise my hands. Instead, I said calmly, Deputy McAllister, I strongly suggest you lower your tone and recheck your information. But the moment he drew his weapon and aimed it at my chest, the air was sucked out of the room. Gasps. Cries. The quiet rustle of bodies shifting away. I didn't budge. Because I already knew what he didn't. The statute he believed gave him authority in that moment. I helped draft it. And he had just broken 3 sections of it. On holy ground. Don't move. Deputy McAllister shouted, his voice cracking with tension. His hands gripped the pistol tight, both arms extended. The muzzle didn't waver. But his confidence, oh, that was starting to slip. Behind him, 2 younger deputies lingered in the doorway, unsure whether to follow his lead or intervene. The funeral crowd had fallen into stunned silence, some frozen in place, others slowly backing away toward the pews. I stayed rooted. Not out of pride. Out of principle. You're on private property, armed, without a warrant, during a funeral, I said evenly. And your firearm is drawn on a civilian. On what grounds? Obstruction of justice, he barked, scanning the room like he was searching for backup in the faces of strangers. We got a tip someone connected to a recent incident was here. You match the description. That's not a justification. That's an assumption. He flinched. I took one slow step forward, never raising my voice. Put the gun down, deputy. You're operating outside of statutory limits. And in case you missed it, Section 241 of your state's conduct code forbids drawing a weapon in a non-hostile situation without probable cause and clear, immediate threat. His mouth parted slightly. He didn't expect me to know that. And certainly not quote it. You're bluffing, he said, his tone faltering. Civilians don't talk like that. I looked him square in the eye. I'm not just a civilian. I was one of 5 federal advisors who rewrote that statute last year during the legal overhaul. My initials are still at the bottom of the draft your department references in training. Someone in the crowd gasped. The violinist slowly lowered her instrument. McAllister's arms dropped a few inches, subconsciously. His mind had started catching up with the weight of his mistake. The doors behind him opened again. This time, a man in a dark suit walked in, no badge on his chest, but authority in his posture. His face went pale the moment he saw the weapon still raised. Deputy, the man called sharply. What are you doing? Too late. He had already aimed at the wrong woman. Deputy McAllister turned sharply at the sound of the voice behind him. His weapon lowered, but not all the way. Director Halvorsen, he stammered. This woman, she matched a bolo description. I was just following procedure. Halvorsen, the regional field director for the state's Department of Public Safety, didn't respond immediately. He scanned the room first, his gaze landing on me, then the mourners, then the still-drawn gun. You barged into a funeral with your sidearm drawn, Halvorsen said slowly, disbelief thick in his voice. And you aimed it at Ms. Valerie Hightower? McAllister blinked. You know her. Halvorsen's jaw clenched. Everyone in this building answers to something she's written. Including me. That was the moment. The moment McAllister's arm finally dropped all the way. His gun hung useless at his side as realization washed over him. The blood drained from his face. I stepped forward now, calm and deliberate, voice clear as crystal. You violated protocol. You entered a place of worship during a service without a warrant. You escalated with deadly force against an unarmed civilian. And worst of all, I paused, just a beat, you acted on vague information without confirming identity. Halvorsen turned to the younger deputies. Get him outside. Now. They hesitated, then moved toward McAllister, who took a faltering step backward like he might resist, but didn't. As they led him out, the room was still silent. Halvorsen approached me. Valerie, I'm so sorry, this should have never happened. I didn't respond right away. I looked around the church. At my family. My uncle's casket. The people who came to mourn, only to be traumatized. Then I said quietly, this isn't the first time I've been mistaken for someone I'm not. But this may be the first time I'll do something permanent about it. His eyes widened. You mean? I nodded. I think it's time I take a more direct role. Policy is one thing. Oversight is another. Halvorsen straightened, already sensing the shift. If you're serious, the State Ethics Board has an opening. I gave a faint smile. Oh, I'm serious. The rest of the funeral proceeded under a heavy hush. No more speeches. No more music. Just a long silence as Uncle Walter was laid to rest beneath a canopy of gray clouds outside the church. Afterward, as mourners hugged and dispersed, some whispered apologies they didn't need to make. Others simply nodded to me with quiet respect. No one could unsee what had happened. By evening, I was in my home office, surrounded by stacks of legal reference books, old legislative drafts, and a fresh pot of black coffee. I'd spent most of my life helping others understand the law. But now, I was preparing to hold people accountable to it. I started by drafting a formal complaint to the Internal Investigations Division. I didn't mention McAllister's tone. I didn't have to. I listed only the facts, entered a place of worship without a warrant, drew a firearm in a non-threatening environment, failed to verify identity before initiating a high-risk stop, violated multiple departmental conduct codes, including subsections 3.4.1 and 4.1.7 of the very statute he was sworn to uphold. I included timestamps, witness names, and reference numbers for the legislation I'd helped write. Everything precise. Everything irrefutable. Then I made another call. Senator Collins' office, a voice answered. Tell her Valerie Hightower is ready to speak. The aide hesitated. The Valerie Hightower? That's right. Within the hour, I was on a secure Zoom call with the senator and two committee chairs. They didn't waste time. Ms. Hightower, Senator Collins began, we heard what happened today. I want you to know, this is going to have consequences. I looked directly into the camera. It already does, I said. And I'd like to recommend a policy revision, statewide. Mandatory recertification for use of force protocol. Annual. Not biannual. And this time, I'll help design the curriculum. The silence on their end was brief, but meaningful. One of the chairs leaned forward. You're proposing to reform the very system you once wrote. No, I corrected. I'm proposing to finish what I started. The next morning, the video went viral. Someone at the funeral had recorded the moment Deputy McAllister pointed his weapon. It wasn't shaky phone footage, it was sharp, steady, and clear. The kind that left no room for misinterpretation. Clips of my calm response. The gasp from the crowd. The stunned silence when I mentioned I co-wrote the statute he'd just violated. By noon, every major outlet had the headline, Deputy aims gun at legal architect during funeral, now under investigation. The public reaction was immediate. Civil oversight groups issued statements. Former colleagues and legal scholars sent messages of support. Some officials, who hadn't called me in years, suddenly remembered my number. But the message I remember most came from a young law student who emailed late that night, "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't flinch. You held him accountable with the words he was supposed to know." That's the kind of power I want to grow into. I sat with that line for a while. Because it reminded me why I'd spent my life in policy work in the first place, not to lecture, not to punish, but to make sure the law served the people it claimed to protect. By the end of the week, the State Department of Public Safety had placed McAllister on administrative leave pending investigation. Internal Affairs opened a case, and an emergency ethics review board meeting was scheduled, with me invited as a guest speaker. I wasn't after vengeance. I wasn't interested in his badge or pension. But I wanted the system to acknowledge its own flaws. Publicly. And then fix them. So I walked into the ethics board conference room 5 days later in a navy blue suit. No jewelry. Just a leather folder in my hand and every statute citation committed to memory. As I took my seat at the front of the room, a familiar hush fell. Because this time, they all knew exactly who I was. And more importantly, they were ready to listen. The ethics board meeting wasn't televised, but the weight of it hung in the air like it was. 12 members sat at a long U-shaped table. Some leaned back with folded arms, skeptical by default. Others leaned forward, pens poised, eager for answers. Cameras weren't allowed, but reporters waited just outside. I placed my folder gently on the desk and stood. "My name is Valerie Hightower," I began, voice steady. "I've served as a legal advisor for over 2 decades. I've helped write the laws your departments reference, teach, and swear to uphold." Several of them nodded slowly. A few already looked uneasy. "Last week, at my uncle's funeral, a deputy entered a house of worship with his firearm drawn. Without a warrant. Without confirmation of identity. Without threat. He pointed a loaded weapon at me, because I matched a vague description. I let the words settle. No shots were fired. No one was hurt. But something far more dangerous happened, the assumption of authority without understanding the responsibility behind it. A woman on the board shifted in her seat. That moment wasn't just about one officer, I continued. It's about a pattern of escalation over investigation. Power without accountability. And a growing gap between those who enforce the law and those who understand it. I clicked open the folder, revealing a proposal titled, Annual Certification Situational Judgment Reform Initiative, Statewide Edition. I'm proposing mandatory annual training, not just in tactics, but in legal comprehension. Scenario-based modules. Psychological response conditioning. And most importantly, direct engagement with the legal texts they operate under. A man from the board raised an eyebrow. "You expect seasoned officers to sit through law seminars?" "I expect them," I said clearly, "to understand the difference between control and protection. And if they carry a weapon of force, they should carry knowledge with equal weight." There was silence. Then a voice from the far end of the table spoke up. "I reviewed your draft last night," said Chairwoman Elise Grant. "It's comprehensive. And blunt. We need blunt." Another board member, older, gruff, leaned into his mic. "Let's call the vote." 10 minutes later, it passed, unanimously. Not just to adopt the training, but to make me the lead consultant on its statewide implementation. I nodded once, then quietly gathered my folder. As I walked out of the building, past reporters and flashing lights, I didn't say a word. Because this time, the law spoke for me. By the end of that month, every major agency in the state had received a memo stamped with the Ethics Board seal and my name in bold at the bottom. Mandatory compliance, legal integrity response reform initiative effective immediately. Some departments pushed back, as expected. Sheriffs grumbled about bureaucratic overreach. Union reps claimed their officers didn't need classroom lectures. But when they saw the footage, when they heard how calmly I dismantled a live threat with nothing but law, they started paying attention. Especially after the state Supreme Court issued a public statement, what Ms. Hightower demonstrated in that church was not defiance. It was clarity. And it was lawful. That quote was everywhere. News anchors. Editorials. Law school lectures. Even printed in bold on a training room wall at one of the state academies. I was invited to speak at seminars, not as a victim, but as a reformer. Each time, I made it clear, I don't want apologies. I want preparation. In one session, I stood in front of a room full of rookies, some barely out of college, some former military, watching me with folded arms and raised brows. I projected the freeze-frame photo of Deputy McAllister with his gun drawn, veins bulging in his neck, finger trembling on the trigger. Then I showed the next frame, me, hands calmly at my waist, staring back at him. This, I said, tapping the screen, is not control. This, I tapped again, is what panic looks like in uniform. They didn't argue. They didn't need to. Some looked away. Others took notes. But all of them heard me. And back in Jefferson County, McAllister's fate was sealed. The investigation found him in breach of 5 departmental policies. He resigned before formal discipline was handed down. I didn't attend the press conference. I didn't need to. The statute he thought gave him power now served as the very instrument that removed it. That was the point. It's strange how quickly your life can shift from grief to reform. One moment, I was mourning a man who taught me to read contracts before bedtime instead of fairy tales. The next, I was rewriting how law enforcement would operate for years to come. The church eventually invited me back, not for a funeral this time, but for a community town hall. The same stained glass windows caught the evening light as local families filed into the pews. Many of them were there that day. They remembered. I stood near the front again, no casket this time, just a microphone and a folder of answers. I want to thank you all, I began, scanning the room, not just for what you witnessed, but for what you refused to ignore. Your voices, the footage, the outrage, the support, turned one officer's poor decision into a statewide reckoning. There was a long round of quiet applause. I'm not here because I was brave, I continued. I'm here because I was prepared. That's the difference between fear and resolve. And from now on, I plan to make sure every officer in this state is equipped with both. A man in the front row raised his hand. Ms. Hightower, would you ever consider running for office? I gave a small, knowing smile. I already have more influence than most elected officials. Why would I settle for their limitations? Laughter rippled gently through the room. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, an older woman came up and gently touched my arm. You didn't raise your voice that day. And still, you changed everything. I looked her in the eye. No, I said. I just reminded them of the rules they swore to follow. The real power? That was always ours. And with that, I stepped out of the church and into the evening air. The law hadn't failed me. But it needed someone to stand still, fearless, long enough to remind it of what it was written for. And I did.